Hi, I'm Marcus Mesher, Associate Professor of Christian Ethics at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you today about the need, as I see it, to more robustly connect the Jesuit values of cura personalis and being women and men for and with others with the act of self-care as a matter of justice. This poster presentation really takes its lead from the Jesuit apostolic preferences, where I see an important connection between these commitments to journey with youth and to walk with the excluded, especially since I think so many of our students, including our high achieving ones, probably would identify as being among the excluded because they question if they count, matter, or belong, or they may feel like they're unseen or unheard, even on our campus. So in the composition of place for Jesuit higher education today, I want to highlight the mental health crisis that's impacting faculty and staff, to be sure, but especially our students. Here's the poster that I've put together. Since it's available to you elsewhere, I won't rehearse it here, but I do want to point out that my work here is inspired by this line from Bell Hooks, where she argues, "Rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion." And I hope that we can envision our campuses as communities of healing for and with one another. I first started researching mental illness in college students after reading this book, iGen, that came out a couple of years ago. And you can see some of the statistics here on the screen. The COVID pandemic has only exacerbated and exposed a trend that was getting worse and worse, described, as a tsunami, not just a rise in mental health issues. You can see 50% of college students rated their mental health below average or poor, and 40% of students failed to seek help. Depression is particularly troubling because of the futility and hopelessness that so many people experience, making it harder to reach out and ask for help. So I think part of my focus for this presentation is how do we lower the threshold for students so it's not so scary or embarrassing to ask for help. More statistics, these are the latest I could find. They come from Inside Higher Ed in April 2021, showing that the rates of mental illness are only getting higher, and only about 15% of college students engaged in counseling and other resources. I find this image to be pretty interesting. So I graduated from Marquette University in 2004, and you can see when I was a student, the Google searches for self-care were pretty low, at least relative to the all-time high that they hit in April 2020 when we went on lockdown, and in September 2020 when we returned to campus and the school year started, and people were searching for how do I integrate healthy self-care into the demands of the school year. I think it's also worth pointing out that the broader composition of place is shaped by consumerism and materialism, where we're bombarded with images and messages that feed on our insecurities, that train us to believe that we don't measure up and that we have to compensate by what we possess or what we achieve. And so many of our students believe that their value is tied to their GPA or the resume, and maybe some faculty and staff are even tempted to think that their value is tied to their annual performance review, which is very different from a Christian vision of being human, where human value is inherent, it can't be earned or lost. And so I think that Jesuit campuses have to serve the role of prophet, to not just inform and empower our students, to make them more aware of reality in order to transform it, with respect to mental illness, but in a culture of dehumanization that really feeds on insecurity and festers and foments anxiety. So I think Jesuit campuses are very well positioned, to try to imagine another alternative. And I am inspired by the line in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis's most recent encyclical, where he invites us to dream together of what more God is making possible in and through us. And so in a social context marked by political polarization and racial tension and injustice and echo chambers online, it's getting harder and harder to engage people across differences. And that social media dynamic, is just compare and despair on steroids. Long ago, Teddy Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy, but Instagram just, reinforces that idea that I'm not as popular or as funny as, or as successful as all the people in my feed. And so we have to resist and interrupt these cycles of not measuring up or comparing ourselves against other people. And as a moral theologian, I'd point out the problem the problematic nature of I do me, you do you thinking that I think is really popular among our students, which, you stay in your lane, I stay in mine, sounds nice as tolerant or non-judgmental, but it also makes it impossible to foster any kind of agreement or accountability. No problem will be solved by I do me, you do you, especially not a problem with the stigma, silence, and shame associated with it, like mental illness. Um, and I think too, the Christian tradition can sometimes get in the way of seeing self-care as an act of justice. When we emphasize kenosis, the Christ-like humility and self-emptying spirit, or the agapic love that seeks nothing in return, we can, kind of like the giving tree image on the right side of your screen here, kind of send the message that self-gift should become self-annihilation. And I always think of that line by Father Greg Boyle: if you're depleted, you're doing it wrong. And after the pandemic, there are a lot of people who are exhausted and spent and depleted, and maybe we just had to be in survival mode. But hopefully, as we turn to life on the other side of the pandemic, it's an important opportunity for us to ask ourselves, who do we want to be? What kind of society do we want to build? And what kind of campus culture do we want to make the norm? And so what could this look like? I get a lot of inspiration from my students. So you see here an image. This is a screen grab from Danielle Stone, who graduated from Xavier last month, from a video that she published in June 2019 that you can find on Facebook through the organization 1 in 5, where she shared her struggles with depression as a student at Loyola Academy and at Xavier University, and the work that she did as an advocate and an ally. And I think normalizing the work that students do to show up as full persons and to share authentically and vulnerably, that's work that we can normalize, and we can stitch solidarity together in the narratives that we share by modeling that it's okay not to be okay, and to ask for help, and to see healing as a communal project. I think a game changer would be to change the default setting. So instead of inviting students to opt into services, that we just make it the default setting that they already are opted into, and they can opt out if they want to. And I point out too, that the most important formation does happen in relationships and in shared practices. So this is an opportunity for us to think about what are the rituals, what are the policies and procedures that we want to build so that we can normalize self-care as an act of justice. Not an either or, that we either are, going off campus to stand with the marginalized, but that we are also integrating the work to show up for those who question if they count, matter, or belong on our campus as well. That certainly illustrates the preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, going into the ditch, taking the vantage point of those who question if they count, matter, or belong, making it our own, and imagining what more could be possible if we try to erase the lines that divide us, to build a culture of inclusion, of equity, of empowerment, where all feel like they count, matter, and belong. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you what this might spark and stretch for you to imagine possible.